The Americans were outnumbered 3-1, outgunned 10-1. Every tactical manual said, retreat. What happened in the next 2 hours and 30 minutes became the most impossible naval victory in military history. This is how they did it. October 25, 1944, 6:58 a.m. Philippine Sea, off the coast of Samar Island. Ensign Bill Brooks was having coffee on the escort carrier, USS Fanshawe Bay, when the lookout's voice cracked over the intercom. Ships on the horizon, bearing 0 for 0. Many ships, very big ships. Brooks grabbed his binoculars and looked northeast. Pagoda masts, the distinctive silhouette of Japanese battleships, not one, not two. For battleships, including one so massive it dwarfed everything else on the ocean. The Yamato, 72,000 tons, 9 18.1-inch guns. The largest battleship ever built in human history. A floating fortress designed to sink anything that floated. And it was 20 miles away, closing fast. Aimed directly at Brooks and the 6 tiny escort carriers of Task. Unit 743, the Americans called themselves Taffy 3. 6 escort carriers built on merchant ship hulls. Thin armor. Slow speed. Designed to carry planes to support ground troops, not fight battleships. Protecting them 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts. Small ships with 5-inch guns. Against them, 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, 2 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. 23 Japanese warships, the most powerful surface fleet Japan had left. American 5-inch guns had a maximum range of 10 miles. Japanese 18-inch guns could hit targets 26 miles away. The Americans would be dead before they could even shoot back. Every tactical manual, every military strategy, every ounce of common sense said the Americans should run, retreat, scatter, try to escape while the carriers launched whatever planes they had. Aboard the destroyer, USS Johnston, Commander Ernest Evans, a Cherokee Indian from Oklahoma who had never lost a fight in his life, heard the report. He didn't hesitate, didn't call for orders, didn't wait for permission. He grabbed the ship's intercom and said, "All hands to battle stations, we're going in." His executive officer stared at him in disbelief. "Sir, we can't fight battleships with a destroyer. It's suicide." Commander Evans looked at him with eyes that had never blinked in combat and said, "We're not going to fight battleships. We're going to kill battleships." Then he turned the Johnston toward the Yamato, the most powerful warship ever built, and ordered full speed ahead. A 2,700-ton destroyer was charging a 72,000-ton battleship. David versus Goliath had nothing on this. What happened in the next 2 hours and 30 minutes defied every law of naval warfare. Mathematically impossible, tactically insane, strategically suicidal. And yet, at the end of the Battle off Samar, the Americans won. Not because they were bigger, not because they were stronger, because they were smarter, braver, and absolutely refused to die. This is how they did it. Every tactic, every decision, every impossible moment. This is the Battle off Samar, the finest hour of the US Navy. Before I tell you how 7 destroyers beat a battleship fleet, you need to understand the man who led them. Commander Ernest Edwin Evans, born August 13, 1908, in Pawnee, Oklahoma. His mother was Cherokee. His father was half Cherokee. Ernest grew up on the edge of the Cherokee Nation during a time when Native Americans faced discrimination everywhere, including the military. But Ernest Evans didn't care what anyone thought. From childhood, he wanted one thing: to be a naval officer. He graduated from the U.S. Naval Academy in 1931. For 12 years, he worked his way up through the ranks. He served on battleships, cruisers, destroyers. He studied tactics. He learned how ships worked, how they fought, how they died. By 1943, he was given command of a brand new Fletcher-class destroyer, the USS Johnston, DD-2 557. On commissioning day, October 27, 1943, Commander Evans stood on the deck and gave a speech that would become legendary in the Navy. "This is going to be a fighting ship. I intend to go in harm's way, and anyone who doesn't want to go along had better get off right now." For the next 12 months, Evans trained his crew relentlessly. He drilled them on gunnery until they could hit targets blindfolded. He practiced damage control until every sailor knew how to plug a leak, fight a fire, save a sinking ship. But more than tactics, Evans taught them something else. Courage, he told them. The enemy is bigger than us. The enemy has more guns. The enemy has better armor. But the enemy doesn't have what we have. We have speed. We have guts. And we have the absolute refusal to surrender. One sailor later recalled, Commander Evans didn't just command the ship. He made us believe we were invincible. We weren't, but believing it made us fight like we were. The Johnston saw its first combat in the Marshall Islands campaign in early 1944. Evans led aggressive attacks, charging into enemy gun range, firing until his ammunition ran low, then retreating behind smoke screens. Other destroyer captains thought he was reckless. Evans thought they were cowards. He believed in one simple philosophy: hit first, hit hard. Make the enemy think you're bigger than you are. By October 1944, the Johnston had earned a reputation as one of the most aggressive destroyers in the Pacific Sea Fleet. Evans had earned a reputation as one of the most fearless commanders. His crew loved him. They would follow him anywhere, which is exactly where they were headed on the morning of October 25, 1944. To understand why the Battle of Samar was impossible, you need to understand what the Americans were fighting. The Yamato wasn't just a battleship. It was a technological masterpiece designed for one purpose: to sink anything the Americans could build. Construction began in 1937 in Kure, Japan, in absolute secrecy. The Japanese covered the dry dock with tarps so American spy planes couldn't see it. Workers signed oaths never to speak about what they were building. When the Yamato launched in 1940, it was the largest battleship ever built. Length, 863 feet, longer than 3 football fields. Displacement, 72,000 tons, fully loaded. Crew, 2,750 men. Belt armor, 16 inches of steel, thicker than a man is wide. Deck armor, 9 inches. Turret armor, 26 inches, designed to withstand hits from 16-inch guns, the biggest guns the Americans had. Main battery, 9 18-inch guns, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a warship. Secondary battery, 12 6-inch guns anti-aircraft, 12 5-inch guns, 24 25mm guns, 4 13mm guns, each 18.1-inch. Shell weighed 3,200 pounds, more than a car. These weren't just big. They were apocalyptic. Maximum range, 26 miles. Shell velocity, 2,600 feet per second. Penetration could punch through 26 inches of armor at 16 miles. One broadside from Yamato's 9 main guns delivered 28,800 pounds of explosives. More firepower than an entire destroyer could. Fire in 10 minutes. When Yamato fired a full broadside, the shockwave could kill a man standing too close. The noise could rupture eardrums. The recoil rocked the 72,000-ton ship sideways. Supporting it were 3 other battleships: Asterisk, Nagato, 42,000 tons, 80 low-inch guns, Sing Sing, Kongyu, Sing Sing, Sanchileo, 0 tons, 8 14-inch guns, Haruna, 36,000 tons, 8 14-inch guns, plus 6 heavy cruisers, each armed 500 with 8-inch guns, 2 light cruisers with 6-inch guns, 11 destroyers with 5-inch guns. In total, the Japanese center force had 23 warships, minus 63 major guns, 8-inch or larger, over 200 smaller guns, combined displacement. Over 300,000 tons against them. The Americans had 6 escort carriers designed to run, not fight, 3 destroyers, 4 armed with 5-inch guns, maximum 5 5-inch guns, 10 40mm anti-aircraft guns, 10 21-inch torpedoes. Total firepower, a rounding error compared to 1 Japanese battleship by every measure. This wasn't a fight, it was an execution. But there was one thing the Japanese didn't account for. The Americans had a commander who didn't believe in mathematics. To understand why the Japanese fleet was even there, you need to know about Operation SHGE, the Victory Operation. By October 1944, Japan was losing the war. American forces had recaptured the Philippines. Japanese supply lines were cut. The Imperial Navy was running out of fuel, ammunition, and ships. Japan's military leadership knew, if they lost the Philippines, they lost the war. Split the Japanese fleet into 3 forces and attack the American invasion fleet at Leyte Gulf from 3 directions simultaneously. Asterisk, asterisk, Southern Force. Asterisk, asterisk, come through. Surigao, straight from the south. Asterisk, asterisk, center. Our force. Asterisk, asterisk, come through San Bernardino. Straight from the north. Asterisk, asterisk, Northern Force. Asterisk, asterisk, act as bait, to lure the American carriers away. The key was the Northern Force for aircraft carriers with almost no planes on them. They would sail north of Leyte and let themselves be seen by American reconnaissance. Admiral William Bull Halsey commanded the U.S. Third Fleet, the most powerful carrier fleet in history. His carriers had been hammering Japanese positions for weeks. The Japanese were gambling that Halsey would see the carriers and chase them. His ego wouldn't let enemy carriers escape. If Halsey took the bait and sailed north, it would leave San Bernardino Strait undefended. And the center force led by Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita and the battleship Yamato would slip through and destroy the American landing fleet at Leyte Gulf. Thousands of American transports, hundreds of thousands of soldiers, the entire invasion force, undefended and vulnerable. It was the last chance for Japan to win a decisive naval victory. On October 24th, Halsey's reconnaissance planes spotted the Northern Force carriers. Just as the Japanese planned, Halsey couldn't resist. At 8 p.m. on October 24th, Halsey took his entire Third Fleet, every battleship, every carrier, every cruiser, and sailed north to chase the Japanese carriers. He left San Bernardino Strait unguarded. He sent a message to Admiral Thomas Kinkaid, commanding the 7th Fleet, supporting the Leyte landings, saying he was heading north. But due to poor communication, Kinkaid thought Halsey had left a force of battleships to guard the strait. At 3 a.m. on October 25th, Vice Admiral Kurita's center force passed through San Bernardino Strait. Unopposed, 23 Japanese warships, including the Yamato, sailed south along the coast of Samar Island. Between them and the landing fleet was one thing: Taffy 36 escort carriers and 7 small escorts, commanded by Rear Admiral Clifton Ziggy Sprague. They had no idea the Japanese were coming. At 6:30 a.m. on October 25, 1944, Taffy 3 was conducting routine operations. The 6 escort carriers, Fanshawe Bay, St. Lo, White Plains, Callinan Bay, Kitkan Bay, and Gambier Bay, were launching planes for ground support missions over Leyte. Escort carriers weren't designed for combat. They were converted merchant ships, thin hulls, slow speed, maximum 17 knots. Armed with one measly 5-inch gun, they carried planes, but most had already launched for morning missions. The planes that remained were loaded with high-explosive bombs for ground targets, not armor-piercing bombs for ships. USS Johnston Commander Ernest Evans, USS Hull Commander Leon Kintberger, USS Heerman Commander Amos Hathaway, USS Samuel B. Roberts, Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, USS Dennis, USS John C. Butler, USS Raymond destroyers and destroyer escorts were small ships minus 2,000 to 3,000 tons, fast 35 knots, but lightly armed and lightly armored. Their job, protect the carriers from submarines and aircraft, not battleships. Fighting battleships with destroyers is like fighting a tank with a pistol. Possible in theory. Suicide in practice. At 6:37 a.m., a TBM Avenger pilot radioed Taffy 3, enemy surface force of 4 battleships, 7 cruisers, 11 destroyers, 20 miles northeast. Closing fast, Admiral Sprague thought it was a mistake. Halsey's battleships were supposed to be guarding San Bernardino Strait. These had to be American ships. At 6:58 a.m., lookouts on the Fanshawe Bay saw it with their own eyes. pagoda masts on the horizon. The distinctive profile of Japanese battleships. Japanese 18-inch shells began falling around the American carriers. Massive geysers of water erupted, each splash 100 feet high. Admiral Sprague realized. Instantly, Halsey wasn't there. The Japanese had broken through, and Taffy 3 was alone. He ordered the carriers to turn south and run at maximum speed. He sent a message to all American forces in the area. Enemy battleships and cruisers 15 miles astern. Urgent, request immediate assistance. But help was hours away. Halsey's battleships were 300 miles north. Kincaid's battleships were 50 miles south. But they had just fought the Southern force all night and were low on ammunition. And the Japanese were closing at 30 knots. The escort carriers could only do 17 knots. The math was simple. The Japanese would catch them in 30 minutes. Once in gun range, they would slaughter the carriers in minutes. Admiral Sprague had one option: sacrifice the escorts to buy time for the carriers. He ordered the 3 destroyers to attack. The small boys, the destroyers, were being ordered to charge directly at battleships. It was a suicide mission. Everyone knew it. But Commander Ernest Evans had been waiting for this moment his entire life. At 7 a.m., when Admiral Sprague gave the order to attack, Commander Evans didn't wait for confirmation. He had already turned the Johnston toward the Japanese fleet. His executive officer said, "Commodore Sprague wants us to lay smoke and get out of here." The Johnston's crew stared at him. They were 10 miles from the Japanese fleet. The Yamato's shells could reach them. Their shells couldn't reach the Yamato. Evans said, "We're going to charge, full speed. We'll close to torpedo range, fire everything we have. Then we'll see what happens." One officer said, "Sir, we'll be in range of their guns the entire time. They'll blow us apart." Evans smiled. "Then, we better not get hit." The other 2 destroyers, Hole and Hiramon, were still forming up, laying smoke screens to hide the carriers. Commander Evans didn't wait. He took his single destroyer and pointed it directly at 4 battleships, 6 heavy cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The Johnston's 5 5-inch guns opened fire at maximum range. 10 miles. The shells couldn't reach the Japanese yet, but Evans wanted them to know he was coming. Japanese lookouts aboard the Yamato saw this tiny American ship charging them and thought it was a mistake or a suicide, maybe both. The shells took 40 seconds to travel 20,000 yards. Commander Evans watched the massive shells arc through the sky. He ordered, "Hard right rudder." The Johnston turned sharply. The shells hit the water where the Johnston had been seconds before. This is what Evans had trained his crew for. Japanese gunners needed time to adjust their aim. By the time they corrected, the Johnston would be somewhere else. It was called chasing. Splashes turning toward where the last shells hit because the enemy was unlikely to fire at the same spot twice. For 6 minutes, the Johnston zigged and zagged through a storm of 18-inch shells. Each one could have obliterated the destroyer in a single hit. At 7:24 a.m., the Johnston closed to 10,000 yards, 5 miles. Evans ordered, "Fire." Torpedoes, all tubes. 10 21-inch torpedoes launched from the Johnston. Each one carried 600 pounds of explosives. Fast, deadly, almost impossible to stop once in the water. The torpedoes streaked through the water at 45 knots, straight at the Japanese heavy cruiser Kumano. Instead of retreating, he ordered the Johnston to keep closing. All guns, continuous fire. Target the cruiser. The Johnston's 5 5-inch guns opened up at maximum rate of fire. Shells poured out 15 rounds per minute per gun. 75 shells per minute total. Most destroyer captains would have fired torpedoes and run. Evans fired torpedoes and kept shooting. For 4 minutes, the Johnston poured 5-inch shells into the Kumano from 5 miles away. Over 300 rounds, at least 2, maybe 3, slammed into Kumano's bow. The explosions were massive. The cruiser's entire bow section disintegrated. The ship slewed sideways, taking on water, slowing down. Then the Johnston's shells hit. over 40 direct hits on the Kumano superstructure. Fires erupted. The cruiser's forward guns went silent. One destroyer had crippled a 15,000-ton heavy cruiser. But Commander Evans had no time to celebrate, because the Yamato had adjusted its aim. At 7:30 a.m., 3 18-inch shells from the Yamato hit the Johnston. The first shell hit the stern, destroying the after-fire room and after-engine room. The Johnston's speed dropped from 35 knots to 17 knots instantly. The second shell hit amidships, destroying the bridge and killing half the men there. Commander Evans was thrown across the deck. Shrapnel tore through his left hand, severing 2 fingers. The third shell hit the forward gun mount, killing the entire crew. In 3 seconds, the Johnston went from a fighting destroyer to a floating wreck. Fires raged below deck. The steering system was damaged. Half the crew was dead or wounded. The ship was listing 10 degrees. Any other commander would have ordered abandon ship. Commander Evans wrapped his bleeding hand in a torn shirt, stood up, and said, "Steer from aft." "We're not done." With the bridge destroyed, Evans moved to the aft steering station. The Johnston could barely move, but it could still shoot. Evans ordered, "Make smoke. All remaining guns, independent fire. Target anything that moves." The Johnston began belching thick black smoke from its funnels, creating a smokescreen. At the same time, its 3 remaining 5-inch guns kept firing at any Japanese ship in range. But Evans understood something critical. He couldn't win by firepower. A destroyer's 5-inch guns couldn't penetrate battleship armor. One tiny destroyer, crippled and on fire, refusing to die. Still shooting, still fighting, making smoke so thick why couldn't see what was behind it. And behind that smoke were the American carriers, the real targets. Japanese commanders assumed the carriers were behind the smoke, maneuvering, preparing to launch airstrikes. So they focused on the Johnston instead of pushing through the smoke. He turned the Johnston into a distraction. Every minute the Japanese wasted shooting at him was a minute the carriers could escape. At 7:45 a.m., the destroyers Hole and Heermann joined the fight. Commander Kintberger aboard the Hole saw what Evans was doing and ordered his own suicide charge. The Hole launched torpedoes at the battleship Kongu, then turned to fire at Japanese cruisers. Commander Hathaway aboard the Heermann did the same, charging straight at the battleship Haruna. Now 3 destroyers were fighting an entire fleet. And somehow, impossibly, they were winning. Not winning in the sense of sinking battleships, winning in the sense of stopping them. Japanese admirals were trained in decisive battle doctrine, the idea that battleships should stay in formation, advance together, concentrate firepower. But these American destroyers were attacking from multiple angles, launching torpedoes, making smoke, firing constantly. Japanese ships had to maneuver to avoid torpedoes, had to turn to keep the destroyers in gun range, had to split their fire. The tight Japanese formation began to break apart. At 8 a.m., the destroyer escort Samuel B. Roberts joined the fight. The Sammy B was even smaller than the Johnston, only 1,700 tons, armed with just 2 5-inch guns. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland saw Evans' Johnston on fire and still fighting. He turned to his crew and said, "This will be a fight against overwhelming odds from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can." The Sammy B launched 3 torpedoes at the cruiser Chokai, scoring at least 1 hit. Then it closed to point-blank range, minus 5,000 yards, and opened fire with its 2 5-inch guns. For 35 minutes, the Sammy B fired 608 rounds from its forward gun before the barrel literally melted from overheating. They switched to the rear gun and kept shooting. At 8:51 a.m., Japanese shells finally found the Sammy B. She took 3 direct hits and began to sink. Lieutenant Commander Copeland ordered abandon ship. As the crew jumped into the water, they could see the Johnston still on fire, still moving, still shooting. By 9 a.m. the battle had been raging for 2 hours. The Johnston was a floating wreck. Half its guns were destroyed. Its speed was down to 10 knots. Commander Evans had lost 2 fingers and was covered in burns and shrapnel wounds. At 9:20 a.m., a Japanese destroyer squadron spotted the crippled Johnston and moved in for the kill. 7 Japanese destroyers surrounded the Johnston. From 2,000 yards, they opened fire with everything they had. The Johnston fired back with its one remaining operational 5-inch gun. Survivors later said Commander Evans was everywhere on the ship, directing fire, organizing damage control, encouraging men who thought they were about to die. One sailor recalled, he was bleeding, burned, missing fingers. But he never stopped giving orders. He never showed fear. He made us believe we could fight 7 destroyers and win. They couldn't win, but they could die fighting. At 9:45 a.m., the Johnston took its final hits. Shells pierced the hull below the waterline. The ship began flooding uncontrollably. Commander Evans gave the order he had hoped he would never give. Sailors jumped into the water. The Johnston was sinking bow first, fires still burning, its one remaining gun still pointed at the enemy. As the crew swam away, they looked back and saw Commander Evans still on the sinking ship. He was last seen on the bridge, saluting the flag as the Johnston went under. At 10:10 a.m., the USS Johnston disappeared beneath the waves. Of the 327 men aboard, 186 died. Commander Ernest Evans was among them. He was 36 years old. He had commanded the Johnston for exactly 13 months. In that final battle, he had crippled a heavy cruiser, damaged multiple other ships, distracted the entire Japanese fleet for over 2 hours, bought time for the carriers to escape. One Japanese officer later said, "I thought we were fighting American battleships. How could destroyers fight like that?" But the Johnston wasn't done changing the battle. While the destroyers were dying, Admiral Sprague was using the time they bought. The carriers were running south at maximum speed, but they were still slow, only 17 knots. The Japanese were still catching up. At 8 a.m., Japanese cruisers got within range of the escort carriers and began hitting them. 1,000 with 8-inch shells. The carrier Gambier Bay took multiple hits. Fires erupted. The ship began slowing. At 8:50 a.m., the Gambier Bay was dead in the water. At 9:07 a.m., she capsized and sank, the only U.S. aircraft carrier sunk by surface gunfire in World War II. The American planes, the ones that had launched earlier for ground support missions, returned to the battle. They had no armor-piercing bombs, no torpedoes. Many had already dropped their weapons on ground targets. Pilots made dummy runs on Japanese battleships, flying straight at them, forcing the Japanese to maneuver, disrupting their formations. Some pilots dropped depth charges meant for our submarines. Others fired machine guns at battleship bridges, knowing they couldn't penetrate armor, but hoping to distract Japanese gunners. One pilot ran out of ammunition and made repeated fake attack runs just to force Japanese ships to evade. It was desperation tactics, but it worked. Japanese ships kept turning to avoid attacks. They lost speed, lost formation, wasted time. And every minute wasted was a minute the carriers could escape. At 9:11 a.m., Vice Admiral Kurita, commander of the Japanese center, force aboard the Yamato, made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Not retreat, not escape, just ... stop fighting and pull back. Some historians think he believed he was fighting Admiral Halsey's main carrier fleet, and that American battleships were nearby. Some think he was exhausted, confused, and made a mistake. Whatever the reason, at 9:11 a.m., with victory in sight, with the American carriers almost in gun range, Vice Admiral Kurita ordered the Japanese fleet to turn around and withdraw through San Bernardino Strait. Not because they sank the Japanese fleet. They didn't. Not because they outfought them. They couldn't. They won because they made the Japanese think they were fighting a bigger force than they actually were. 3 destroyers and 4 destroyer escorts convinced an entire Japanese battleship fleet that they were facing a major American task force. It was the greatest bluff in naval history. For decades, historians tried to understand why Vice Admiral Kurita withdrew when he had Taffy 3 at his mercy. Japanese survivors offered several explanations. From the Japanese perspective, the battle was chaos. American destroyers attacking from multiple angles, smoke screens everywhere. planes diving from all directions. Radio reports of more American forces nearby. Kurita thought he was fighting heavy cruisers and fleet carriers, not destroyers and escort carriers. He believed Admiral Halsey's main fleet was nearby. Despite winning tactically, the Japanese had taken damage. The heavy cruiser Kumano was crippled. The cruiser Chikai had been torpedoed and was sinking. The cruiser Suzuya was on fire. 3 heavy cruisers out of action in 2 hours, against what Kurita thought were light forces, meant he would be destroyed if he encountered Halsey's battleships. Kurita's fleet had been under continuous air attack for 3 days. They had fought through the Sibuyan Sea, been bombed repeatedly, lost ships. The crews were exhausted. When the destroyers charged, Japanese gunners couldn't believe what they were seeing. It seemed suicidal. Unless the Americans knew something the Japanese didn't. Unless American battleships were nearby. Unless this was a trap. Kurita believed his mission was to destroy American transports in Leyte Gulf. He thought Taffy 3 was a diversion, trying to delay him. By 9 a.m., he had spent 2 hours fighting destroyers instead of pushing through to Leyte Gulf. Every minute delayed was a minute the transports could escape. So he withdrew, intending to regroup and then push south to Leyte Gulf. But by the time he regrouped, American airstrikes had intensified. Admiral Halsey had turned his fleet around and was racing south. Kurita decided it was too dangerous to continue. At 12:30 p.m. on October 25, 1944, Kurita ordered a full retreat back through San Bernardino Strait. The mission had failed. Not because of American battleships, because of 3 destroyers, a Japanese staff officer wrote. We had anticipated many kinds of enemy resistance, but we never expected this kind of furious, reckless attack. The Americans fought with a ferocity we had never encountered. It was as if they did not fear death. Another officer noted, the destroyer attacks broke our formation. We could not concentrate fire on the carriers. We wasted time evading torpedoes. By the time we reorganized, the opportunity was gone. The truth was simple. Commander Evans and his destroyers had done the impossible. They turned a mathematical certainty into doubt. And doubt was enough to win. 1 escort carrier sunk Gambier Bay. 2 destroyers sunk Johnston. Whole 1 destroyer escort sunk Samuel B. Roberts. 23 aircraft, lost to 1,583 men, killed or missing. 3 heavy cruisers sunk Chikuma, Suzuya. 3 heavy cruisers, heavily damaged. Hundreds of sailors killed. Mission failed. Invasion fleet, at Leyte, survived 141 men. Survived the sinking. They floated in the Philippine Sea for 50 hours before being rescued. Many died from wounds, exposure, or shark attacks while waiting. Only 141 of the 327 men who started the battle lived to go home. Every survivor said the same thing. Commander Evans saved their lives. Not by winning, by refusing to lose. One sailor recalled, "We should have run. Every manual says destroyers don't fight battleships. But Commander Evans taught us something. Sometimes you have to do the impossible. And sometimes the impossible works." His body was never recovered. He went down with his ship. On November 8, 1944, his wife received a telegram. "The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you, ... on January 15, 1946. More than a year after his death, Commander Ernest Edwin Evans was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, * for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity at the risk of his life, above and beyond the call of duty. Commander Evans led his ship into the heart of the Japanese fleet, attacking with guns and torpedoes against overwhelming odds. His actions in the face of certain death reflected the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. He gallantly gave his life for his country. * He was the first Native American in the U.S. Navy to receive the Medal of Honor. Commander Leon Kintberger, of the Whole, went down with his ship. He was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross. Lieutenant Commander Robert Copeland, of the Samuel B. Roberts, survived. He spent 50 hours in the water before being rescued. He was awarded the Navy Cross and continued serving until 1947. Commander Amos Hathaway of the Heermann survived. His ship was the only destroyer in the attack to survive the battle. He received the Navy Cross. Rear Admiral Clifton Sprague, who commanded Taffy 3, was asked after the battle how they survived. He said, "The destroyers saved us. They charged battleships with 5-inch guns. It was suicide, but they did it anyway. I don't know how to explain courage like that. I just know I witnessed it." Sprague later wrote, "In no engagement of its entire history has the United States Navy shown more gallantry, guts, and gumption than in those 2.5 hours off Samar." Vice Admiral Kurita never fully explained his decision to withdraw. He faced criticism in Japan for failing to destroy the American fleet. But Japanese sailors who fought at Samar had enormous respect for the American destroyers. A Japanese destroyer captain wrote, "We expected the Americans to run. Instead, they attacked. We had bigger ships, bigger guns, better armor. But they had courage we could not match. The battle destroyed Japanese confidence. They had the most powerful battleship ever built, and they retreated from destroyers." After Samar, the Imperial Japanese Navy never again attempted a major surface engagement. The age of the battleship was over. The Battle off Samar was tactically a minor engagement. Only 4 ships sunk on each side. No strategic objectives captured. The Yamato, the biggest, most powerful battleship ever built, was chased away by destroyers with 5-inch guns. Not because the destroyers could sink it, because the destroyers made it afraid. After Samar, no navy ever built another battleship. The era was over. Every tactical manual said destroyers should screen carriers and avoid battleships. Commander Evans ignored the manual and attacked. His charge first, think later approach disrupted the entire Japanese battle plan. One crazy decision changed the outcome of the battle. Modern naval tactics now emphasize aggressive action, even when outgunned. Samar proved it works. The Japanese had overwhelming firepower, but they were exhausted, confused, and demoralized by 3 days of air attacks. The Americans were outnumbered 3-1, but they believed they could win, and belief turned into reality. Today, the USS Johnston's wreck sits 20,000 feet below the Philippine Sea, the deepest shipwreck ever found. It was discovered in 2019 by explorer Victor Vessel. Photos show the ship's guns still pointed forward, frozen in the moment of attack. The Navy named 2 more ships, USS Johnston, in honor of Commander Evans and his crew. Every year, on October 25th, the Navy holds a memorial service for the Battle of Samar. Sailors read the names of the men who died. They remember the impossible victory. But the real legacy isn't in memorials or history books. It's in what the battle taught every sailor who came after. Commander Ernest Evans knew he was going to die when he charged the Yamato. He charged anyway. His executive officer asked him why. Evans said, "Because if we don't, those carriers die. And if those carriers die, thousands of men die. So we fight. Even if we lose. Against every law of mathematics and tactics and common sense." Taffy 3-1. 3 destroyers stopped the most powerful battleship fleet ever assembled. Not with bigger guns, not with better armor. With guts, with brains, with the absolute refusal to quit. That's the story of the battle. Off Samar. That's the finest hour of the US Navy. And that's why, 80 years later, we still tell this story. Because it reminds us, impossible just means nobody's tried hard enough yet.